Hello and good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us on session 10C of the YALI Summit. This is Amplifying Citizen Voices in African Development, and we're looking at challenges and opportunities. So my name is Shamsa Suleiman. I work as a project management specialist for gender and youth in Tanzania. And we're joined here today by our three distinguished speakers who are calling us from Liberia, from Connecticut, as well as San Francisco. I'll start by introducing Dr. Joseph Asuka, who has also told me I can just call him Joe, so that's nice. He's the CEO of Afrobarometer. Dr. Asuka was previously program officer Development and Population Program at the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation. And then next we have Mr. Jack Leslie. Jack is the chairman of Weber Shandwick, a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, former chairman of the board of USA for UNHCR, and a participant of UNHCR's missions to Afghanistan in 1998, to Kosovo in 1999, as well as Tanzania 2001, where I'm calling you all from this afternoon. And then lastly, we have Mrs. Patience Coleman Bayan. Ms. Patience is a lecturer at the University of Liberia with expertise in public sector reforms, labor relations, and capacity development approaches. She previously headed the Directorate of Civil Service Reforms, Government of Liberia, where she's been providing leadership and coordinated public sector modernization program. So to learn more about our speakers and their backgrounds, please refer to their bios that are currently available on our event page. But we do want to get started. We only have 1 hour, and we're hoping to get some good, insightful, comprehensive insight on African voices and what that means for young people, what that means for the elderly population in the continent, as well as people outside of the continent. And I'll start by asking on development works and how this is realized, how it's driven, and even owned by the people. So I will start by asking Ms. Patience. In your view, Patience, what is the current state of this connection on the African continent?
Thank you very much. I'm highly moved to be a part of this conversation because when I hear about voice, I get very excited because without voice, I don't think development is going to really work because people have to be within development. Development have to be moving along with people. The continent, I believe that we have more to do. We have made some efforts so far. People are part of the voting process, and we have elected women leadership, and we are making some strides to get some voices that have not been a part of decision making to be a part of it. But at the moment, we need to make more efforts in that light.
Thank you, Patience. Thank you, Patience. Jack, how can we amplify these voices?
Well, first of all, thanks very much for inviting me. I'm delighted to be here. One of the, you gave a lot of titles for me, Shamsa. Most of those are in my past. Today, I'm here as chairman of the U.S. African Development Foundation. And I don't know how many of those listening know very much about USADF because we're probably the smallest agency in the federal government. We were organized 40 years ago in order, in fact, to give voice to Africans. When Congress created USADF, it did so saying that it would be required to give 100% of its money to 100% African-owned enterprises. So it doesn't work through the traditional development model of implementing agencies. It really works in this participatory model, if you will, on the ground, empowering Africans and really finding out from them their ideas for development and then helping them through that. And I think that's the real answer to your question, is that these local voices and local priorities need to come first when we develop economic development strategies, whether it's here in the United States with the many development agencies, or whether it's in Africa.
Right. Right, and I think sometimes part of amplifying that voice is actually giving those voices a seat at the table. So I think that's also a key approach.
Yeah.
But Joey, maybe I can turn to you, Joe. Thank you so much, Jack, for your views. Joe, in your view, what is the current state, of this connection between development work and the realization of development on the African continent?
All right, so just to echo what others have said, thank you so much for having me here. This is really a great opportunity, and I've followed Yalis development for several years now, and I've enjoyed lots of the work they do, especially when it comes to leadership development and developing leaders of integrity. It's a great opportunity to be part of this 10th anniversary. A couple of things to say here. One, I just recently took over the leadership of the Afrobarometer, which is a Pan-African survey research project. And for those who don't know Afrobarometer, I would urge you to just Google our name and look us up. But what we do is, our core mission is to amplify people's voices. We conduct surveys, we speak with ordinary Africans about the issues they're concerned about, what their priorities are, because we believe, and our mission states that, we believe that African societies will thrive if African voices count in public policy and development. And like Jack and Patience said, this is critical. You don't develop a continent or develop a country without taking into account the people for whom you hope the development would affect. And so the Afrobarometer is set up mainly to amplify the voices of people in policy-making spaces, that when decision makers talk about development and think about development and plan for development, they take into account what people's priorities are. And of course, increasingly focusing on the youth has become a major area for us.
Right. Thank you so much for that, Joe. Maybe I can just tag on to you, Joe, again, which is, we've talked about amplifying voices. We've talked about giving voices, in particular to young people. We have young people right now on the call listening. But what are some of the biggest challenges to amplifying voices within the African development that you've encountered since either your position within the Afrobarometer or even, as growing up as a youth in Africa yourself? What are just two of the biggest challenges?
Right, so two big challenges. One is the big deference to elders on the continent, the idea that older people know best and they should make decisions for younger people. Barrier for many people when it comes to amplifying, especially the voices of young people. But I always say that if you want to build a future that is fit for purpose, like you are building a future for this younger generation to inherit, they have to have a say in it. But the challenge is that resistance of wanting elders to be the ones leading in decision making, which is not very helpful. That's one challenge. The second is about our work. We go out there to speak to people. We ask people about their concerns. We want to get their views about development issues and what they will prioritize. But then some of the societies we work in are very closed. So there's civic space is closing, freedoms are limited. And so it is sometimes difficult to really get people to express themselves as freely as they would like to be. And so operating in a very closed spaces is very difficult for us. And even when we collect the information in those spaces, engaging with the right people to make sure that people's voices get heard in policy-making circles, that can also be very difficult because then you're operating in a closed space where openness to listening to what people say is limited. And so it does undermine how much we're able to engage with policymakers.
Right. And I think maybe, Joey, you will agree with me. Sometimes sometimes the disengagement, I think, between the youth and elderly population also stems or is a result of beliefs and culture and cultural understandings. And, that when you grow up, you respect your elders. You don't question your elders. And I think sometimes we transfer that from the home to the office to parliament, right? And to how we manage our lives and the choices we make within our lives. So you don't question, you do as you're told.
And that is what I'm hoping will break, especially with this program
Right.
and the kinds of training and empowerment young people get. One, to think about ways that we can create spaces for youth engagement in the future of these countries, because they are the ones who are going to inherit, and they are the ones who are going to live in that future, and they have to have a say. The second thing is to say that young people have the drive, they have the energy, they are the ones who they need outlets to deliver on these assets. They have a lot of assets that they can deliver and contribute to development. And we need to create a space for them to bring those assets to influence our development.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you. I'll turn to Jack. Jack, in your in your experience of working in development, from USAID all through to refugees within the UNHCR, maybe just as well as life overall, what do you consider to be the two biggest challenges to amplifying citizen voices within Africa's development?
Well, first, I'd agree with Joe's point on elders. In my case, I wish my children would pay more attention to me, considering myself an elder. But in any event, I think the two biggest challenges are, frankly, first, money. The fact that youth need investment to stimulate entrepreneurial growth. We are seeing in some countries, Kenya, for example, which established the Youth Enterprise Development Fund and Uwezo Fund to help young people find jobs. But really, the need to get more investment targeted to young people to pursue their entrepreneurial dreams, I think, is the first thing that's necessary. And the second I'd focus on is good governance, because good governance empowers people, and young people, need to push for accountability and democracy and respect for human rights and justice and the rule of law. Because at the end of the day, the absence of good government, I think, is really one of the single biggest barriers to not only peace and security, but to economic growth and the reduction of poverty.
Right. Thank you, Judge. I think you really raised some important discussion, in particular with good governance and as well as resources. I was just myself speaking with Voices of Tanzania this morning, who say, we work so hard, but it's challenging when you don't have the resources to take you from point A to point B. So I think that was important. Ms. Patience, what do you think are two of the biggest challenges to amplifying citizen voices within Africa's development?
Thank you very much. The two biggest challenges, what I will do is to put them in two perspectives. The first one will focus on what leaders can do, and the other one will focus on what citizens and youth can do. I think poor leadership is a big challenge. Jack just talked about governance. And I believe that if leaders do not have the mindset about young people and how they can contribute to development at all levels, and if traditionally you have been seen as a young person and just as a young person without expertise, without understanding of certain issues, it means that for poor leadership, it won't allow you to actually listen to the young person. Instead, you just be looking at it like, I don't think you have anything to offer. And I also think that poor leadership leads to a lot of attitude from leaders without security. How can voices be heard? If young people are afraid to speak, maybe because they will be seen as opposition voice, it also brings a lot of problems. Challenge is poor leadership. And if we can that our leaders to provide security for advocates, voices, they can allow us to be who we are, and not necessarily because we are young people. No, because we have a voice, because we have input to make, because we have something relevant to say, and because it's making impact, we should be a part of it. And the second aspect is how inclusive are the voices of some of us who advocate. Sometimes we leave behind some people who can hardly speak, maybe the illiterate. We don't really represent the voices. Maybe I can be louder. So I get on the radio talk show every time I make my voice heard. But am I reaching out to marginalized people all the way in the rural areas so that I know what actually the issues are there? and that I can amplify their voices either through my network, or I can empower them to speak out the same way I'm speaking. The issue of inclusiveness in our advocacy also need to improve, as well as the leadership at the highest level.
Thank you. Thank you so much to you, Patience, as well as to Jack and Joy for highlighting some of those challenges and gaps that we're facing. I think just not just in Africa, but I think around the world. And we are currently living, I think, in a generation where there's just so many young people with very, very low patience. So I think in the next question, I want us to be able to now look at some of those challenges and then ask ourselves, what are the opportunities that we can use to better amplify the citizen voices, in particular in the development sphere? So this is a two-part question. The first is, what is your top recommendation amplifying these voices within African youth? And then the second bit is, how can youth facilitate and take ownership of this process and its outcomes? I'll repeat those questions again, just in case, and I'll turn it over to Jack. We're going to start with Jack. What are your top recommendations for amplifying the voices of African youth? And how can youth facilitate and take ownership of this process and its outcomes? Karibu, Jack.
Yeah, no, the first thing I would say is to find a partner. And that partner can be a partner in a new venture. It can be a partner that can help you find critical financing. It can be a mentor who helps you through the early stages of developing a venture. But going on your own is tough anywhere, and especially in a more difficult environment, oftentimes like Africa. So I think the first thing I would really do is to look for like-minded people and look for a partner. There are, as to your point about what you can do to really mobilize, now more than we've ever seen, at least in my lifetime, there's an opportunity, and not just through things like social media, but there's a much greater level of multilateral help that's available if you look for it, and you need to look for it. I think my recommendation is, don't be shy. If you have an idea, go out there and find the help. And I think if you're persistent, you'll find it.
Right. You really would. You really would. Thank you. Thank you, Jack. And I think sometimes that's just part of the challenge, right? It's the persistence. You have to be persistent and continue to strive for your seat at the table, as well as your voice, because you could be invited to the table, but nobody asks you for your opinion. Joe, what do you think are some of the opportunities for young people? And how can young people take ownership? So, just what I was saying about, you could be invited to the table, but you're not given a chance to speak. So how can young people, see those opportunities as entry points to be able to amplify their voices?
So I think I'll start with both political and social activism. The key thing being, young people should become a lot more politically active than they are now. I say this because our surveys have shown that young people are usually less, engaged in when it comes to political issues, whether it is in voting, attending community meetings, engaging with others to raise issues of, public concern. These are spaces where young people can make a lot of contribution, but all over the world, you would say most young people don't really engage so much in political activity. And I think that's a missed opportunity. Young people need to think of, not wait to be invited, but to get into those political spaces and participate very actively. Whether it is elections and voting, please make sure you're out there and voting. If it is communities, having meetings with communities and thinking about ways that you engage your political leaders, I think just being very active is a critical piece. The second component I will add is just social, activism. And this, it is now much easier to form a social movement anywhere. And I think African youth can do well by thinking about a cross-border Pan-African social group. And I say this because, as Jack said, if you go alone, you won't go far. If you want to go far, you really need to go with others. And I don't think you should just go with people in your country. I think young people on the continent can form a social movement that is cross-border, and that can be a powerful tool for engaging with political actors who will not listen to your voice. Because if they know that, if politicians know that you have a big following and a constituency that is behind you, and that this following is a massive continental organization, then that is where politicians begin to listen to what these young people can have. So I will encourage, especially the use of technology and platforms like social media, where I'd like to call it kind of a Pan-African social movement, because we have tried the political unions where there's Pan-Africanism and the African Union, and everything is driven mostly by the older generations. But we see that that hasn't really worked well. I think we can start from the younger people, starting with a social movement that is cross-border, and that might even lead to a better political union than we have now.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you. Miss Patience, what do you see as opportunities? And I welcome our speakers to give references on the countries they're in right now, or even some of the countries that they've been and served in, because I see that's a great way of us to learn about different countries and the approaches they've taken to amplify voices. So I welcome you to give examples, and I'm sure our audience would very much appreciate it. Ms. Patient, I'll turn to you lastly on amplifying these voices. We know the challenges, but what are the opportunities, and how can young people amplify them?
First of all, we have mentioned that poor leadership is one factor, and the other factor is whether young people are seen as partners on the table, whether we're able to make the contributions, whether we are seen as people who are able to make contribution. So I would say that the opportunities that we have starts at the point where we understand that politicians and our leaders are aware of the power of our voices. For us to know this, see what happens during elections. We are needed so much during elections to run campaigns. And then after elections, when decisions are to be made, how come we are not as important as we were? I think it will be our chance if we are well prepared. And the preparedness may not necessarily be that you go to college, which is very important, and I encourage a lot of young people to be educated, but it also involves getting a deeper understanding of the issues that we are advocating for. Because even if you and you are not able to talk about what are the issues within education that you want something to change on, or if you are not able to talk more deeper about the health situation in the country, I believe that it will be a missed opportunity when you sit at the table. So I always encourage young people in Liberia and other places where I have the opportunity to meet and talk to people. I talk about coalition building. In order for us to build coalition, it means that ourselves. There are some youth groups who are supposed to specialize in education matters, which means that not that you are not focusing on other aspects of development, but you are understanding, and if there's any issue about education, you understand it, you have deeper knowledge about that. Health, other coalitions could focus on health. But if we focus on everything, sometimes we are just on the top of it. We really not making deeper contribution to the policy discussion, and it can be a missed opportunity. So I think we need to be prepared so that when we get on the table, and sometimes advocacy will not allow us to just wait for a table to be. It's a way to we create the table so we can. If we are prepared, if we are part of coalition, if we have soft skills, if we are part of politics, I think those are major things that young people need to do in order to move ahead and amplify our voices.
Thank you so much, Patience. I think those are some really great background. discussions and points that you make. And I think something that is key for me in what you just said is missed opportunities. I mean, I think even of myself, sometimes when I sit back at my desk and I say, oh, I should have said this and I should have said that, I should have made that contact, that partnership that Jack talked about, the partnerships. How do you identify partnerships where you advocate for issues that are so dear to your heart, and not just your heart, but the nation's heart and the millions of young people around the world? So with the missed opportunity, I want us to tag on some of the audience questions. I want to thank the audience for sending in questions. But the first one, we've answered some of it. So it says, how can young Africans advocate for themselves to make their voices heard by their government representatives? So, we've talked about advocacy, we've talked about partnerships, we've talked about making yourself available at the table and voicing yourself. But I think with this particular question, it's looking at government representatives. And I think I see Joey nodding his head, but I think we will agree sometimes a fear of young people is, how do you approach government point of contacts, government office ministers? How do you sit with them and talk to them and voice yourself so you don't miss that opportunity, that patient that just talked about? So I will repeat the question one time, and I will turn it over to Joe and Jack, and hopefully they can help us answer that question. But it says, how can young Africans advocate for themselves to make their voices heard by their government representatives? You can just briefly answer it. Karibu, Joe.
Well, I would just start by saying that run for office and become the representative, because I think the young people can run for office, and there's no reason why you should wait for somebody to be in office for you to be the one contacting them. So that's the first thing I'll say. But secondly, I mean, contacting government officials can sometimes be daunting. But as we mentioned earlier, you can only get traction when you go with others. And I think mobilization is a key thing, because some of these spaces are not easy to enter. The only way you can get in is really to have a constituency behind you. And so some kind of mobilization of others to make sure that your issue is a collective one as opposed to an individual would help. But I would want to encourage young people, don't shy away from starting to run for office, if even that means starting at your local government level to enter, and then you can rise through the ranks till you get to a national office. That is a key way to ensuring that your views are really represented.
Thank you, Joe. Welcome, Jack.
Yeah, no, I would absolutely agree with Joe. Yeah, I started my career as a political consultant, so I'm all for running for office, and I think, many young people find that daunting, and they really shouldn't. It's probably the most important contribution they can make. The other thing, though, I was thinking about as Joe was talking is that many young people can make a real difference and can get the attention of their governments by doing big things in their communities that get attention. So I think, we operate, USADF does in 20 sub-Saharan countries, and I've been to most of them, and in most of my trips, I try to have lunch with at least as many of the Mandela Fellows as I can find in the country, and I remember so many of them, and they've had real influence on their governments. I mean, for example, Peju Joayoba, who is a social entrepreneur in Nigeria, and she came up with this notion that there were so many women in Nigeria who were dying during childbirth that she could really do something about it by developing a birthing kit, which was relatively low cost, and found a way of beginning to distribute it over most of the country. She's distributed 600,000 of these birthing kits. And, she has saved untold number of lives. And that was one person with one idea who made a big impact and who got the attention of the Nigerian government, and they're beginning to try to be helpful through their regular health ministries. So if you don't want to run for public office, and I agree with Joe, that'd be a great thing to do, you can still have real influence with your government by making changes and organizing in your own community.
Right. Thank you. Thank you very much, Jack, and thank you, Joe. We'll go to our second question from the audience, which is, I think, a question that we were all expecting, and it's to do with social media. But I think it's an important question because the audience asks, how can technology and social media help young people amplify their and voice? And I will turn it over, and we'll go to Joe. Terrible patience.
I think we are in the age of social media. The fact that a lot of things are happening online. Even before COVID-19 in Liberia, one of the medium through which we get to know what's happening in the country, what young people are saying, is on Facebook. So we use a lot of Facebook. There are a lot of interactions, and young people can take advantage of it because there's no one place where you can amplify your voice. If you have the opportunity to do it online, do it online. If you have the opportunity to do it in person, do it in person. But as it relates to online, there are certain ways through which you can be more active online by being interactive, have more followers, have more friends, and have more networks. So if you want to be an online user and actually amplify your voice, you have to get more people that you are connected to. Sometimes we shy away from certain online platforms, maybe think that, oh, I don't know how to use this platform or not. It's important for you to be on Twitter. It's important for you to be on Facebook, be on LinkedIn, be on any platform you think by which you can meet other people and you can say something and actually be heard. Because our politicians, our leaders are all on social media. So if you use the opportunity to be on that media, we think that your voice can be amplified. So make use of the opportunity and never shy away from it. We are in the age of internet. I will say that. Thank you.
We are in the age of internet. That is true. We are certainly in the age of internet, and a lot more people have access to it now. We are also in the age of censorship, right? And cover's been blocked, and young people, not just young people, but this is the focus of our session today, young people, which is why I'll keep turning to young people, having their lives threatened. So, maybe even as we respond, can we also maybe highlight some of those challenges? What happens, for example, when a young person wants to amplify a particular issue that a minister, for example, has implemented without fear of life or causing divisions within communities? So
All right. So I think that's where the big challenge lies. It's always a sense of, censorship, but I think it comes down to how big your group is in terms of your mobilization. And so the more you can pull people together as a collective, I think would make a difference, because you target people only when they are individuals. When you're a group, it's much more difficult to target.
And when it comes to using social, sorry, yes, please continue.
If I may add, the physical security of online activists and advocates definitely, by far, is a serious challenge that all of us are looking at, because that has the propensity to make people shy away from saying anything on social media. So I think also part of the broader aspect of advocacy, sometimes it's not easy to be an advocate because the platform is not created. There are security issues, but yet we have to sustain our advocacy in order for something to change. It is about having the change mindset. No one says go and risk your life. We will continue to advocate so that we can be heard of online users, but that shouldn't scare us away. I think we should engage the platform. I think we should make efforts to say things about the issue of security, because those are issues that concern us, but we cannot shy away. That's the main thing. I just wanted to jump in to say we cannot shy away because of whatever reason, because advocacy is going to help us break through.
Right.
Could I, Shamsa, could I just jump in with one?
Sure.
As my day job is in communications and marketing, so we work in this area. And one of the things that's so important to recognize is content. And, content on traditional media, television, radio, print, is more difficult and more expensive to create. But content in social media, you can do it on an iPhone for very little cost. So I think people need to think about not just saying things provocative in social media and hope to get followers, but really being thoughtful about how you can create content very engaging. And you can do it simply with this.
Right. At the touch of a button, right? But I think even with content creation, the partnership issue I think also comes in, working with people that are greater and have more experience in communications and in the writing and editing of narratives, and also looking how those narratives engage targeted audiences. So I think that's also important. So we have a few more questions, but I do want to give the chance to Ms. Samantha Sibanda, who's just joined us. If she can just maybe briefly speak a little bit about how she has used her voice in amplifying youth voices in her country. And Ms. Sibanda is a human rights advocate. She's been working in the area of disability for over 8 years. She is the founder of Signs of Hope Trust, an organization that advocates for inclusion of people with disability in national as well as international development. Ms. Samantha, I welcome you for 2 minutes. Could you please just tell us a little bit about how you've used your position to amplify youth voices in your country?
I really that inclusion is a problem for many people. And so I think that, especially concerning people with disabilities and so forth, we can really increase numbers by being more inclusive. So in my work, I really push for everyone, including government officials, to be inclusive. Because the moment you have silent voices in terms of all the policies, you always realize that there'll never be perfect policies and laws. So in my work, I really push for a greater inclusion. I also push for accessible ways of engaging people, because you realize that there are people who are in the rural areas, other people are in urban areas. How exactly are we targeting everyone so that all the voices can be heard? So for me, I really feel that inclusion and accessibility are key factors in terms of having youth voices amplified. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Sabanda. We appreciate that. I will turn to the audience questions. And I'm going to have Joe and then Samantha, please, if you can start by answering this question for us, which is, speaking of your own personal advice, how can you share about ways that you have found your own voice in the development sphere? So I think that the audience that's calling in, the young people, the development partners, the government offices, they want to be able to learn from you as Joe, as Samantha, as Patience, as Jack. How have you been able to use, how have you been able to find your voice in the development sphere? Karibu, Joe.
Thank you. So I think there are several ways, and I'll use for myself. I think I found my voice in a couple of ways. First of all, I always give the story that when I grew up in a small village in Ghana, so my village is quite close to Burkina Faso, government was very far away. Like, it was just there was no possible way of even communicating in any way with any government official. And so it was more of just growing up and fending for yourselves as it is. And just that experience gave me this motivation that I want to change that. I want that government should be close to people. Government shouldn't be as far away as people as I felt when I was growing up. And so that's where the Afrobarometer gives me that opportunity, because we are able to get into the remotest parts of the continent to speak to people who would normally not even have any interaction at all with governments. And as Samantha said, these are folks living in villages who never get the opportunity to even interact with any government official. And so we do provide a platform at Afrobarometer for people like that to express themselves, and we carry those voices and make sure we amplify them. So for me, I think it's just a motivation from my own experience that the lack of interaction with government motivated me to say, I want to change this. And that is what I've done most of my life. The second thing I've done to find my voice is writing, because I always believe that if you write compelling messages about what is you hope to be done and how you would expect certain policies to be formulated, you can make an impact. And so just really critical writing, thinking about it. For young people, I would encourage people to think about how you can learn to write critical pieces, policy relevant pieces, opinion pieces, so that you're writing alone, even if you don't speak. And some of us are quite introverted, so we don't engage much in the public domain, but your writing can speak for you. And so learning to write critically is useful. And as Afrobarometer and as a leader of Afrobarometer, that is one of the pieces that I'm trying to come into, where we train people to write critically and can contribute to conversations and policy dialogue.
That's great. Thank you, Joe. Samantha, how were you able to find your voice in the development sphere?
So for me to be able to find my voice, it was really a participation issue. I think the more you stay at home, the more you don't participate in whatever is going on, the more you become confused because you're alone and you don't know how to engage. So for me, I participated a lot. I started by attending a lot of events, being outgoing. And so also YALI was one of the things that I found amplifying whatever I'm doing, because I started with the online course for the YALI RLC. And then I got into a bigger network of leaders, seeing what they are doing. And so really engagement really for me was something that I found helpful, because the moment that I started to participate, and by the way, I'm non-disabled, so I had to find my voice as a non-disabled advocate in the disability sphere. So I really had to participate. I had to engage people with disabilities, because having my idea is one thing, but then how then I fit into the whole sphere is another thing. So for me, I used to engage and I used to participate in a lot of events, and then that way I was able to see how I'm supposed to really participate and how I'm supposed to engage with other people. So that way, in terms of participation and engagement, was a good one for me.
Thank you, Samantha. Thank you for sharing that. And we are glad you and Joe both had the confidence and the courage to be able to find that voice and follow it. For the question 4, I will turn it over to Patience and Jack. And the question is, what is the specific role that Yalis can play in amplifying Pan-African youth voices? And we'll start with Patience. Can you hear me, Patience? Yeah. Okay, I think something just happened with her network. I will start with Jack. Jack, what is the specific role that Yalis can play in amplifying Pan-African youth voices?
Well, the great thing about YALI, I think, is that it not only empowers individuals who join it every year, but it's created a network of like-minded young people all over Africa. I think I may have it wrong. It's, we're celebrating the 10th anniversary, and it's something like 40,000 or more young people have participated in YALI. And so what I find exciting about it is not only how it can immediately provide opportunity through its programs every year, both in the United States and USADF, by the way, provides a stipend for those YALI individuals who want to pursue an entrepreneurial track. So we believe in, I mentioned earlier about financial resources being such a barrier. To give some kind of grant to a young YALI participant in order to go back and start a business is critically important. But I think to my first point, I think the use of YALI by all of you who are listening in as a real potent network throughout the continent is a fantastic opportunity for everyone.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Jack. Joseph, what are some of the ways that YALIs can amplify this Pan-African voices?
All right, so I thought maybe just 2 thoughts. One, I still want to go back to my idea of a social Pan-Africanism, where I I think of, getting these young people connected to each other on a platform where they can build a movement around common issues of common interest. I think young people are, desirous of their voices being heard. And I think for your voice to be heard, coming together, and YALI has already created this huge platform of leaders who can come together, seamlessly engage with each other, and talk about issues. And this is cross-border. These are from different countries. And so just the ability to connect and network with people from other countries is helpful. It gives you the momentum to drive your agenda and your voices forward. But also it allows you to create a network where you can have some safety, so that even if there's repercussions in terms of your engagement, your network would come to your defense. And so if you have all people from all across the continent coming to your defense because your government has arrested you, it's likely to make a bigger impact. And so just maintaining those links and strengthening them and growing the network would be hugely important. But just to add a second point to that is, we need leadership of integrity. So at Afrobarometer, we generate data that is useful for policy making. But policy making only becomes relevant and can be impactful if leaders have the integrity to use the data as it should be. And so I do value what YALI does in terms of producing leaders of integrity, and we need that critically at this time.
Right.
Correct, by the way, one of the numbers I used, Shamsa, in my earlier, I just got a note, it's 700,000
Yeah, look at that. That's amazing.
Engaged by YALI in 40 African countries. So it's just an extraordinary network of people.
It really is an extraordinary network of not just people, but I think really, really active, proactive advocates, lawyers, artists, scientists, politicians, development workers, feminists, you name it. I mean, it is an incredible network of individuals with some pretty strong backgrounds. And it's really just an honor to be able to even just be a little bit, a small part of YALI has really been an honor for me, myself. But I do want to give Patience a chance. She did drop out. Patience, if you can just very briefly just talk about ways that YALIs can be used to amplify some of these voices. Very briefly, we're almost coming to a time.
Thank you very much. I encourage everyone who would like to be very active in community activities to be a part of YALI activities, because the YALI network has grown a lot. Like in Liberia, we have a lot of young people walking up to us just to ask us like, how can I? And we always tell them that there's a Mandela Washington Fellowship Program. There's also a regional program. Before you can apply for YALI, you have active in the community. So being active in your community will not just start when you decide to join YALI, but to have change things in your community to contribute to development. Before I even applied for the YALI program, I was already very involved in the community, and I like to focus on education. So I have a program where job seekers can learn new skills, skill and reskill, so that they prepare for the job market. So I have a large range of mentors that I connect with, and they are very, very helpful, because if you are applying for YALI program or you are applying for a scholarship program, if you just connect with us, we are there to help you with the application process, reviewing your application, telling you where you went wrong and where you can improve. And I think it has been very helpful. YALI has really exposed me a lot as well. I know I've been involved in other activities, but YALI continues to give me opportunities. And this is why I'm here today speaking about these issues. And I'm always happy to do it. Thank you.
Thank you, Patience. Thank you. And I think it's that sense of community and belonging that I think is also unique about the YALI network. I have a last question, really one last question before we close. And I want all our speakers here to answer, but only in one sentence, really, it's a tough question, but really only in one sentence, I want to challenge you, to challenge us as moderators and as participants of this call. I will start with Samantha and then Jack, Joe, and then Patience. The last question that comes out of our audience is, what would you say to young Africans who have been so discouraged by corruption in their governments? How can they continue to be optimistic? And remember, I'm challenging you. This is a tough question, but just very briefly, how can they continue to be optimistic?
So I would say what you identify as letting you down, as something that touches you, this is exactly your purpose. There are other people who have seen corruption and they never care less. So that is your purpose. And I really encourage people to say, start where you are. It doesn't start in government. The corruption doesn't start in government. It starts really lower in our communities. And so by touching the next person and living whatever your purpose is supposed to be, this is how you can actually help the situation. So don't be let down, because that is exactly what you have been called for. For me, it was disability. For that person, it can be corruption, So you start wherever you are, and you can correct from touching the communities at grassroots levels.
Thank you, Samantha. Start where you are. Jack, welcome.
I would say don't lose faith. I took such great inspiration in Nelson Mandela, who sat in a prison cell for so many years and didn't lose faith, and was able to make such a huge, huge difference against the most awful form of corruption, apartheid. And so I think that, if you, as Samantha says, if you start in your own homes and your own communities, and you build it and you're willing to organize and you stay with it, you can make a difference. So keep the faith.
Thank you, Jack. Joe, welcome.
Well, I don't think I could add more than that, keeping the faith, because as I always say, things are always impossible until they get done. And I think that is one of Mandela's lines of statement that you would see. And I think when something faces you that is so daunting, that is the thing that you should tackle. And as I gave my story, there was something that I found in my community that was not helpful. And I said I needed to change that. And so, and yes, you start at the smallest level as possible. It may not change in your lifetime, but the seed you sow today could influence a lot of things down the line. So don't lose faith. Sow the seeds, and they may germinate in your lifetime or beyond you.
Thank you, Joe. Patience. How can our youth continue to be optimistic?
I would say never give up that you're asking for. Before you know it, you will be that leader in that seat with integrity.
Okay. Thank you. And I think Patience are probably the only one that probably won this challenge. I challenge just one sentence each. But even with the additional sentences, I think those were some very important advice for youth. So I do want to close the session, but before we close the session, and I always want to end on a positive note with words of inspiration, with words of hope and encouragement and advice really for a better world. So I want to start with Jack. Jack, if you had just one word of inspiration or encouragement for our youth that are working to amplify their voices in the development realm, what would that word be?
Curiosity. By the way, I tell that to my own kids. I tell that to people who work in my company. And I think it's universal, stay curious, ask questions, be willing to push the envelope, and that'll get you far.
Thank you, Jack. Joe, what would your word be?
I would say write. And use your voice in your writing. I think it's one of the outlets that you can make a big impact, even if you can't speak out in public. You can use your voice by writing.
Thank you. Samantha, what would your word be?
My word would be start, because I see that a lot of young people are kind of afraid. They're always home and they fail to participate. They have got the dreams and the ideas, but then they remain ideas because they aren't starting. So my word would be start. Where you are, no money, no whatever, but just start.
Right, right. Thank you. And I think sometimes something that is almost the hardest, the most difficult is starting, right? It's taking that first step. Right. Thank you. Thank you, Samantha. Patience. What would your word or even sentence be?
Preparedness. Be prepared to take ownership of development in Africa.
Right. Right. And I think something that I did want to highlight is, and something that young people tell me when I go out and do my work is, Shamsa, Africa is wide. It's wide. It's a wide continent. It has different cultures, and different ethnicities, and different ways of governance and forms of governance, and views towards rights. So I think something that is also key, even as we close the session today and we have our audiences listening, is to be able to look at where you are, right? Someone said in our speakers, start where you are. So, really being able to look around you and observing your surrounding and saying, where can I start and how can I start? But I think it's also critical to tailor our approaches to our communities, understanding our communities and the needs that the community needs and wants. And I speak from a development perspective, from someone who sits at a desk, Monday to Friday. I sometimes I'm lucky to go out into the field. Sometimes when I'm designing activities, I'm designing from a desk. And that's where assumptions come through. And I think assumptions can go wrong. So we need to be able to invite people to our offices, to our desks, give them that space, but more importantly, the voice to be able to tell us how we should be designing, implementing, monitoring, and causing sustainability within our activities. So I think that's also important. But I do want to thank you. I want to thank Jack. I want to thank Joe. I want to thank Patience and Samantha for, making this time. I know for Joe it's 6 something. We know where he is. And for Patience, it's still early morning as well as Jack. I'm not sure about Samantha, what time it is in your home, but it's almost 5:27 in my country here in Tanzania. So we're rounding up the day, and I think it's a great place and time to end the day, to have heard all you've had to share with us, to have spoken about your experiences and ways that young people can continue to be optimistic, because Jack just used the perfect example, for someone who sat in some very, very difficult condition for years, but didn't give up on what he believed in. So I want to say thank you for the opportunity, and I thank you to the participants who called in. Thank you for making time. I wish all of you a great day ahead, and thank you to Catherine for all her support in the background. Thank you, and goodbye.